First of all, welcome to Mission San Juan Bautista, dedicated in 1812. My name is Brian Kelley, and I'm a volunteer assisting the Diocese of Monterey and some of the parishes with some of their building and restoration projects. As I've done about 15 projects for the Diocese of Monterey, again, helping pastors do what they want to do but don't know how. We seismically strengthen Holy Cross Church. I've worked on other larger projects, particularly associated with the missions, the Royal Presidio Chapel in Monterey, which needed stabilization and strengthening, and tremendous upgrades. Everything that we're talking about includes upgrades of the electrical, the mechanical, all of the various sections to basically preserve the particular structures and give them another 75 to 100-year life.
What's the significance of the project at Mission San Juan Bautista?
Well, the significance is, first and foremost, you're dealing with a mission church and a convento that is significant national historic structure. In addition, it is significant from the point of view of it tells and is part of the story of the California history and the formation of the state of California, and it's intertwining with the indigenous people and intertwining indigenous people and the European immigrants who came across the country to settle in this particular area. So a highly significant story.
So, Brian, I look around and I don't see much wrong with the church other than it looking a little bit old. What is it we're not seeing?
Well, what you see is you span the church and you look at the walls, the ceiling, the arches, the decorative paint. You see a beautiful interior of a church. The problem with the mission of San Juan Bautista is what you don't see. What you don't see, as an example, the windows. All of them leak. All you have to do is look at this. It leaks. And we're going to talk a lot about leakage. Leakage through the roof, leakage through the flashing, leakage through the separated plaster from the wall, leakage around the windows. Any place where water can enter creates a near-term and long-term problem for the adobe.
When the moisture comes into the adobe, what's happening there to the adobe?
Well, it will weaken and soften the adobe. Similar to Mission San Antonio, where we lost the whole wall.
Brian, what is the preservation approach you're taking with this project?
Again, the preservation approach is, there are different methodologies that the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Group allow you to do. You can preserve it, preservation, you can restore it, and it's very simple at this particular mission is to preserve it because it's 99% intact. It's what's intact that needs to be saved because of the proximity of the San Andreas Fault, the probability of a massive shake, and because of the size of the church. If you don't move forward as quickly as you can, you are open to a major seismic event. And if you read all the literature, that day is coming closer and closer. And they do predict massive earthquake events. And since you're so close to the San Andreas Fault, the mindset needs to be, you're going to save it or you're going to lose it. And one of the methodologies of stabilization of this mission church is total connecting everything together. Your center core walls to the bond beams. Bond beam goes all the way around the perimeter of the church, just like the the edge of the top of a shoebox. And every rafter, every piece of wood is clipped together, so that what we're looking for is, when we get through with the preservation phase, the Mission Church in a seismic event can rock and roll, everything moves together, nothing's disconnected, and it can be strengthened in itself in that it's all together. And I talked earlier about connections, and I want to point those out. Besides all the connections of all the wood and the trusses, we're connecting every one of these rafters are clipped and bolted to the bond beam on both walls. And each bond beam is drilled, and the wall is drilled down 31 feet, and a center cord rod is placed in and epoxied to create the strength for the wall. And again, it's tying the wall to the remainder of the structure.
I noticed that all the walls have concrete plaster on them. What is concrete plaster, and what's the problem for these missions?
Well, the problem is that the technology wasn't developed early enough, and most of all of these missions have cement plaster, with the cement that was produced in their era, some in the 19th century, some in the 20th century. And as a result, it creates an incredibly hard surface, so hard it can't breathe. So one of the problems is water leaks and expansion, whatever, the plaster is delaminated, some cases from the adobe, and moisture can get behind it and start the deterioration of the adobe. As an example, at one wall we pulled off at Mission San Antonio, and pulled all the plaster off, cement plaster. Behind it, where water had over years slightly got in, there were gouges, some of them 8 inches deep, where the adobe was affected by the water and just slumped to the bottom of the wall. And you had to go in and spend a lot of time rebuilding the wall, protecting the wall to the point that, okay, now we can put a cement plaster back on top, which we did. And although you've got to maintain the lime plaster, but you're protecting the adobe for its many, many years, many centuries, if it's maintained. The roof is, all of the trusses are reinforced, all the trusses are clipped, before you put the tile back on, you put structural plywood that's going to collect all these forces. They're all, believe me, screwed and nailed to the trusses, and blocking between the trusses, blocking at every joint in the plywood, so that before you put the tile on or any underlayment, that roof structure is rock solid, all tied together, and it becomes a perfect piece. Again, you can take the analogy of the top of a shoebox. It's all tied together. You can do whatever you want. You can kind of twist it, but when you put it on and it's confined to the bottom of the shoebox, now you've got a solid shoebox. You can do about everything you want with it. And the other very important factor in our preserving this mission church are the arches that you see separating the side aisles from the center nave. One of our major issues is to deal with the tremendous weight of the adobe above and around the arches that are being supported by the existing columns. Part of our project team is a preservation architect, and we are required by the State Office of Historic Preservation and the National Park Service to have a preservation architect on our team that when we're through will sign off on the particular project, that we've conformed to all of the rules and regulations for historic structures. And basically the concept is what you see before we start, other than what we're fixing, is what you're going to see when we're finished. And a good example is probably the Carmel Mission Basilica, that nobody knew we had done anything. They'd say, "You've been working there for 6 months, we don't see anything." That means we did our job. So tremendous effort that we're not changing the appearance. We're saving a structure for posterity. What you see is what it will look like after the stabilization process. Nothing's changed. No change in paint scheme. No change in look. Right now, it is stabilize it and put it back exactly as it looks. To the audience and anybody who watches this vignette, that, thank you. Thank you for wanting to come and listen to this. I'm very passionate about these missions, but only you can save them. I can do kind of my stuff. I can get the right people, which is really the name of it. But really, it's the people, the stakeholders who care enough about this particular mission to get involved and save it. Save it for not necessarily our generations, but for the future generations that tell a tremendous story of the history of California, history of the area, and a little bit of life it is resurrected of what happened back in the earlier part of the 19th century, what happened to the indigenous people, what happened to the European immigrants who came and populated the area. And it's special, and it will remain special if you can get involved and become one of our stakeholders.